Hello everyone, and welcome back to another book review. So today I am going to be reviewing another romance book. And I know I just read a bunch of romance books over the Valentine's Day, the week leading up to Valentine's Day, and I was pretty romanced out. I'm not really a romance reader to begin with, so you might be wondering why I'm reading a romance book. The answer to that question is it was the book club selection for the book club I'm in for the month of February. So people in my book club decided that because February was the month that Valentine's Day is in, and we needed to read something a little spicier and fun for Valentine's Day, we were going to read a romance book. And the book that was selected was Goddess of the Hunt by Tessa Dare. I actually didn't read this physically. I listened to the audiobook version available on Hoopla. And as a result, I don't really have the book, but I do have the Hoopla profile right here. So this wasn't even my first time reading Tessa Dare. I had read another book by Tessa Dare over my Valentine's Day reading challenge week, and that was Do You Want to Start a Scandal? So I was already a little familiar with Tessa Dare's writing style, and I also kind of went in with some preconceptions, some ideas about what I was expecting out of this book because I had read one of her books before. So this book starts on, or the premise of this book is we are following Lucy Waltham. She is a woman who is looking for a husband. She believes she's in love with this man who always comes to her brother's estate named Toby, and she decides she's going to seduce Toby, but she wants to practice to make sure, her moves are right before she moves in on Toby. So she decides that Jeremy Trescott is going to be the perfect practice person. Jeremy is this man who also comes around, and she thinks that she's going to read some seductive techniques in this book. The book is the Wanton Dairymaid, so that kind of ties into the Wanton Dairymaid series. This is book 1 in the Wanton Dairymaid series. So she reads this book, and then she decides to practice on Jeremy, which is how this book opens. Of course, it's a romance book. One thing leads to another, and maybe the practice is no longer practice, and there might be real feelings involved. That is the premise of this book, and of course, because she is practicing on Jeremy and then she winds up falling for Jeremy, and then they're kind of trying to push each other away, but then there's complicating factors and they wind up having to be tied to one another due to propriety, and they're just trying to work out their feelings towards one another. So this was similar, I felt like, in writing style, in what I expected from Tessa Dare. It was exactly as I expected. So I want to take some time to focus on the positives first, because I'm not a romance person, so I'm going to have a lot more negatives than I do positives. The positives. The writing was funny. I did find that very enjoyable. I felt like the characters sometimes had humorous sayings, and I found myself laughing out loud a little bit when I was listening to this. So that part was enjoyable. I did enjoy the writing style, or the humorous aspects, especially of the female characters, the way they talk to one another. I thought that was really, really well done. I also liked that in Tessa Dare's other book that I read, Do You Want to Start a Scandal? The main character in that book, Charlotte, I feel like was also humorous and had little funny quips that she would say. So that's something that I found similar between the two books that I've read by this author. And I also liked the narrator. I saw some comments on, I forget where, a review of the audiobook saying that people did not like the narrator. I don't really know why. I enjoyed the narrator. I thought it was perfectly fine. I did listen to her at 1.5 speed, and I'm going to talk about why in a second when I get into the negatives. So I did think the writing was funny, and I did enjoy the narrator. The writing being humorous brought the rating of this book, my rating of this book, up a whole star, so that tells you how important that was to me. And of course, giving props to the narrator, who I thought did a good job on the audiobook version. That's something though, if you read this in the paperback or the like print version, you're not going to get that aspect. The negatives. I'm not a romance person. This is not to drag anyone who likes Tessa Dare. Romance is really not my cup of tea for the most part, and I already knew Tessa Dare's style of romance wasn't really my cup of tea especially, so I already knew there was going to be some negatives coming in. I tried to go in with an open mind, but I just was not having this. If it were not for the humorous writing style, this would be a 1-star read for me. The humor brought it up to a 2-star, and I have two big problems. The first was very glaringly obvious and contributed to the reason I was listening to this to 1.5 speed, and that was the fact that this book dragged on. I feel like every time I thought the story was coming to an end, there was another problem and another issue and another situation, and I just didn't understand when the book was going to end. So at some point during the book, the two characters wind up getting married, and I was thinking, okay, they're getting married, they're going to have the third act breakup, they're going to have a problem that comes up and they're going to have to resolve it, and then they'll be back together. I've read a couple romance books at this point. I always know there's a problem about 3/4 of the way through the book that they're going to have to work through, but then they get back together relatively quickly, and the whole romance is summed up neatly. So they get married, they're having their little problem, and then I remember pausing the audiobook around the marriage time and looking to see how much time we had left in the audiobook, thinking that we were pretty close to being done, and we still had 5 hours of a 12-hour audiobook. I believe it was 12 hours. So I'm like, we're not even close to being done. This is 12 hours and 42 minutes, so closing in on 13 hours, and we still had 5 hours left by the time they were getting married. And I was like, oh my word, when is this thing going to end? How many more problems can they squeeze in? They can squeeze in a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems between the marriage and the end of the book, and it just kept dragging on. It was the audiobook that would not end. Normally, I do not listen to audiobooks at like the faster speeds, just regular speed is fine. I'm not really impatient. I usually listen when I am running on the track indoors at my gym, or when I am commuting to and from work, or when I'm taking long drives to go visit family or relatives. So I'm not really in a rush to get through most books. I sped this up because I could not conceive of me sitting through another 5 hours. I think I had sped it up before the marriage, but I was committed to listening to it at 1.5 speed because I just needed to get through this book. I wasn't enjoying it and I still had a ways to go. Now, my book club, obviously they're not going to force you to finish the book. If you really aren't having it, you can say that you didn't finish it because of these reasons, but I did want to give it an honest go and have a good discussion, so I did decide I wanted to finish it, which is why I continued to listen at the fast speed. Also, we reached the end of the book. They're together, they're in love, they're happy, and then there's an epilogue. So even when the story's done, it's not done. You still have another 40 minutes. I don't know if it's 40 minutes. You still have a whole epilogue to listen to that at that point, I was going down the highway. I was coming home from work. I was like, okay, the book is finished. Hallelujah. And then what do I hear? Epilogue. Oh my, are we not finished with the book? How much more can we squeeze in? So I felt like the book just dragged on way too long. This could have been a 9-hour audio, and that's not because the narrator read slow or something. That was just because I felt like the plot dragged on. The writing dragged on, and they could have cut a lot of stuff out that wasn't necessary. Also, the epilogue because this is part 1 in a series, I feel like it may be setting up part 2, but it also like quickly tried to address another thing that had been hinted at throughout the rest of the book, which I feel like you still have to read the epilogue, or listen to the epilogue, but I still was just not having it, especially when I was like, the audiobook is done, and then I heard epilogue. Here we go, epilogue. So that was my main problem with it. I'm not enjoying romance. I don't like the story. I didn't care about the characters very much. As always, I cared about Lucy more than I cared about him. I found in the other Tessa Dare book, I cared about the female character more than the male character. I just did not care about Jeremy or his problems, or I don't know. I just didn't connect with him as a character. Lucy was a little more entertaining, funny. I liked her friendship that she developed with the person who was supposed to be her rival. So that was really sweet, and I did like that. So I did wind up connecting with Lucy more, but I didn't care about Jeremy, and we just spent way too much time on this plot and this story, and I was not having it. And the epilogue, that really got to me. The other part is just something else that I've generally found about these Tessa Dare books. I can't really say that, I've only read 2, but the women always wind up giving up so much to be with these men, and I feel like it's just never worth it. In Do You Want to Start a Scandal by Tessa Dare, she gave up her trip around continental Europe to get married. That seems like a bad deal to me. And I understand maybe social conventions of the time, maybe there were different factors going into that made marriage seem like a more attractive option. I don't know. Just from a modern perspective, I'm definitely going to take a trip around continental Europe if those are my options. Like, you get married and you stay in a manor, or you can take a trip around continental Europe. I guess in my head, I'll take a trip around continental Europe and then figure out the marriage part later. In this one, I feel like Lucy just became duller, not really her full version of herself and her sparkly, shiny, unique personality when she got with Jeremy. I feel like she became just a duller, less interesting version of herself. She gave up a lot of her personality, and she just kind of became this like more quiet, less assertive, less herself individual, which I don't like. I don't think you should have to give up an aspect of your personality or yourself to be with someone. I do understand we're reading about like historical romance, so things that happened in the past when women had different expectations, but I don't know. I don't care. If I was into this sort of romance, then I would definitely be like, oh, I understand the social rules of the day mean that women have to change these things once they get married. And then I think, so let me back this sentence up. I think readers of this genre would appreciate and understand these differences, but for someone who's not a reader of the genre, I just find it kind of sad to see them giving up the personality, especially because the female character tends to be the one in these historical romances that I identify with more and that I like more out of the two. Maybe if I liked the men more, I wouldn't have this push and pull. I should also add that I find that in these historical romances, I do like the female better, but in romance overall, I don't necessarily prefer one half of the party when we have a man and a woman. I should add, like if it's a man and a man, then obviously I can't prefer the woman because there is none. But if there's a man and a woman in the romance, overall, I feel like I don't have a preference for one gender over the other, but when it's in these historical ones, I almost always tend to prefer the women. I really wonder why. Maybe it's just more personality. I'm not sure. That's just something I've noticed in the previous Tessa Dare book and in this Tessa Dare book. So yeah, that was just something that I noted, and I think contributes to my feeling that the women have to give up more in these books to get married. Overall, this was a 2-star. It was a 1-star for all aspects except for the humorous writing that brought it up to a 2-star. But I'd love to know what you think about this book. Did you read Goddess of the Hunt? Have you read the Wanton Dairymaid series? I'm actually curious to see what else is in the Wanton Dairymaid series. I'm going to try to find it quickly. I would love to hear your thoughts about it. For people who do read these historical romance, I would love to hear like what you enjoy about it. I'm not trying to like be rude or like, what do you enjoy about these historical romances? It's just not for me. And I'm genuinely interested in hearing some of the things that people enjoy about this genre that do enjoy it. So the Wanton Dairymaid trilogy has, How to Catch a Wild, no, that's not one. Goddess of the Hunt, which is 1, Surrender of a Siren, which is 2, and A Lady of Persuasion, which is 3. So if you're interested in this series, or if you like book 1, there are 3 more books in the series. Other than that, that's about all I have for this review. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Please leave them in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.